Hi. If you've ever wondered how an artist decides to become an artist, I can tell you I have no idea. The thought came to me to travel the world, learning of all the other lands, and tell their stories through my art. I was 6 years old. We lived on a farm on the western edge of the Nebraska Sandhills, somewhere between the Pine Ridge Reservation and the Mirage Flats. My dad worked on the reservation, and my mom was a school teacher in town. I had a horse named Pepper and a dog named Daisy. We had a garden and a tire swing, and we watched The Muppet Show once a week on TV. I love that show so much. I wanted to create stories for it. My mom would give me big sheets of paper, and I would fill them with giant scribbles. And in the empty spaces, I would create bridges, roads, cul-de-sacs, gardens, forests, and towns. I called them Scribble Towns. Where does the idea come from to be an artist? Maybe it comes from a desire for change. I remember the moment. It was spring. I was lying on my back in a big field, our farmhouse just out of sight. My mom had tied plastic bread sacks over my shoes to keep my feet from getting wet, and thawing snow had turned into trickling streams which ran through the fields. I'd been pretend fishing all day with a stick and a string. I'd also been pretending my dog Daisy, a black Labrador, was the queen of the Sandhills, who had just returned from riding her horse across the land to tell me all the secrets of the fish. I was listening and staring up at the sky. Because we lived near the Mirage Flats, sometimes images would appear in the clouds. I was staring up at those puffy clouds when I decided to be an artist. But what does an artist do, Daisy seemed to ask me. What kind of artist will you be and why? And so, with the wind blowing and the meadowlark singing and Daisy patiently listening, I said, I need and want to be heard. Words and language had failed me, maybe because I was only 6 years old. But only the birds and the butterflies, the animals and Daisy seemed to understand when I sang. Why are there so many songs about rainbows? You know the song. So maybe it was Jim Henson, the man behind The Muppet Show, who gave me the idea. Rare is the photo you'll find of him without a Muppet on the end of his arm. And the thing is that people forgot there was a person behind the Muppet. Later, when we had to move to the city, we kept a Muppet in the glove box of my mom's Pontiac Catalina. She'd pull up to a stoplight, and I'd hunker down on the seat and hang this green and furry Muppet out the window and mime joggers as they ran by or imitate kids on the street corner. But when I was a child on the farm, I thought, the thing about being an artist is it's a safer way to communicate with people. Because when you tell people the truth, sometimes they get mad at you, sometimes they judge you, and sometimes they abandon you. But if you're making them laugh and have fun, or showing them something beautiful, they cannot look at you and say exactly why they were having a feeling, because they're looking at the art and not at you. In terms of being an artist, you're behind the curtain. I dreamed of communicating with people in the Scribble Towns I drew. There in Scribble Town, adults listened. But in the real world, outside of Scribble Town, adults were the ones who controlled everything, and they were the ones who made the change. I wanted to change what was happening in my world, but I wanted to do this without anyone knowing I had anything to do with it at all. People think change has to be something big, but it can come from something very tiny. Listening is a good place to start. Listening to yourself, for instance, can be a catalyst for change. Maybe I thought, if I was an artist, I would have a voice. And so I grew up, but for some reason I kept the ideas I'd had while very young. I began to work. This isn't so easy when you're an artist. Everyone says, why? Why would you do this? What does an artist do? But I'd already answered those questions from my own imagination long ago when I was very young. I wanted to hear what people needed and give it to them. For there were only two reasons to be an artist: to escape the truly disappointing nature of reality, or embed yourself in the reality, draw the truth out of it, and dress it up and disguise it in a new language so people can tolerate it. And while they are tolerating the truth, inspire them to change it. This is what I wanted to do. My palette began to expand beyond the flat piece of paper into schools, towns, and cities. I began to travel to Indonesia, Greece, Turkey, and northern England. I began to feel that everything in nature and everyone around was a part of a big art, and within that big art, there were language barriers, cultural misunderstandings, people trying to find their homes, and people seeking their families. What could be a catalyst to bring these things together? Maybe, I thought, to tell the truest story through art, it must be a universal story. A universal story is one that everyone can understand throughout the world, and to tell one, you only need to listen. This is what I try to do. My projects include working with schools, towns, and public works. I visit rural areas where art programs have been abandoned. I work with science, math, and language teachers. I work on community murals, build gardens, write music, film, and short stories. I make big paintings and cartoons. But none of these things can begin without listening. And within all of these things, there exists a problem to solve. There are many people right here in Nebraska involved in projects like this. People in rural towns, and new citizens from Burma, Thailand, Vietnam, Honduras, Sudan, Mexico, from all over, people are seeking a sense of place. And if you ask, everyone has a story to tell. Maybe art is not your language, but if you are seeking to be a catalyst for change, I can give you an example of a problem that was solved through art. This is a true story where the chapters are seemingly unconnected, but converge like colors on a palette. In one color, a young man is in big trouble. In another color, a city seeks to solve issues of speeding traffic. In yet another color, a neighborhood longs for a greater sense of community. And there is your palette. If you are listening, you have everything needed to be a catalyst for change. From the palette, the story emerges, for seemingly out of the blue one day, a mother comes to tell me her son is in trouble. He'd been standing on the street corner, spray painting graffiti on city buses as they drove by. A judge had offered him an alternative to detention, which was to do something good for the community. I asked to meet with her son. I gave him 5 big sheets of paper and markers and asked him to create 5 illustrations in the shape of a circle and to return in 3 days. For at the very same time the young man was in trouble, the city was making changes. They had just passed an ordinance to allow for murals to be painted directly on the intersections of streets, and several were being created in town. A neighborhood was having troubles with gangs, and a community center near a water park was worried about speeding traffic near the areas where children played. In 3 days, the young man returned with his drawings. I took his drawings to the city and asked them to choose their favorite of the 5. The city chose their favorite in hopes that the young man's beautiful design, painted on the street near the water park, would help to slow down traffic and protect children. Street paint was donated, the fire department came to wash down the streets, and 17 people, including the young man and his family, came to paint that day. Even the television and radio crews came to interview the young man. They asked, "Will you ever paint graffiti again?" And he said no. Now he knew he could engage an entire community to make a difference. I feel this is one example of a problem solved through art. The young man's story could have ended abruptly by serving detention. but instead, he worked with his family, the neighborhood, and the city to create something positive with long-lasting effects. They learned a sense of community pride together, and they learned a new language, yes, through art. This is thinking in a universal and divergent way. You have the choice in how you face your hurdles. You can ignore the world, watch in apathy, or be a catalyst for change. You can bring all the parties to the table to create. You can listen with empathy to what is needed. You can create the time and the space for all the elements to exist together. And then, this is very important, you can get out of the way so change can happen. It seems like a lot, but it's simple. It's one continuous line, seemingly unconnected, but who knew within the empty space, whole towns, stories, and lives existed? You will know because it exists already in your heart and mind and dreams. Thank you.